In Acts chapter 21, verses 27 to 36, we see Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, being attacked in Jerusalem by a mob of angry Jews who accuse him of teaching against their law and defiling their temple by letting a Gentile friend enter. Paul is rescued by the Roman commander, who binds him with chains and takes him to the barracks. Let's take a closer look. Paul believed that God wanted him to be respectful of people who had different beliefs, customs, and traditions. He did not mind following some Jewish customs, as long as they did not contradict the good news of Jesus or stop him from sharing the gospel of Jesus with the Gentiles. He agreed to do a special ceremony in the temple to show respect for the Jewish Christians, who appreciated Paul's gesture, but the Jews who did not believe in Jesus were angry. These Jews from Asia had seen Paul before in other places. They were angry to see him in the temple because they thought he came to mock it. They also did not like his teaching about Jesus because they thought he was against their religion and their people. They made up some lies about Paul and told them to the crowd that he hated the Jews and their law, that he taught that the temple was not important. They lied to them by saying that he brought a Gentile into the temple to disrespect it. They told these lies because they wanted the people to hate Paul, so they twisted his words and made false accusations. They already had a deep resentment and hostility toward Paul and his message, the gospel of Jesus Christ. They saw him as a traitor to their people, their law, and their temple. They believed he was teaching against their identity and heritage as God's chosen people. They also believed he was violating their sacred space by bringing a Gentile into the temple, which was forbidden by their law. These Jews were not open to the gospel of Jesus that Paul preached, which was that Jesus was the Messiah, the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and that salvation was by grace through faith in Jesus Christ for all people, both Jews and Gentiles. They were blinded by their pride, prejudice, and tradition. They did not recognize that Paul was actually honoring God and his word by proclaiming Jesus as Lord and Savior. Many people came to Jerusalem to worship God at special times. They were easily angered, especially if someone said something bad about their religion. They did not care much about what Paul taught them, but they hated him when they heard he did not follow their rules. They did not listen to his side of the story, just believed the lies they heard and wanted to kill him. They were careful not to make the temple bloody because they believed it was a sin, so they dragged Paul outside before they tried to kill him. They did not care about killing a person, but cared a lot more about keeping their rituals. That is what happens when people think religion is only about doing certain things in a certain way and not about being a loving person who loves God and loves others as themselves. Roman soldiers were staying in a building near the temple. They could see everything that was happening there and heard that there was a commotion in the city. They quickly got ready and ran over there to stop it. They saw that the people were angry at Paul and wanted to kill him. So they grabbed Paul, put chains on him, and asked him who he was and what he had done wrong. The people shouted different things at the same time, and they did not make sense. The Roman leader did not understand them and decided to take Paul to his building and find out more. The people tried to stop him, but the soldiers carried Paul away from them. God used the Romans to protect Paul from the Jews. The Romans did not care about Paul's religion or the religion of the Jews, but they did care about keeping things in order. They did not like the Jews or their God, but God used them to help Paul. The Jews and the Romans did not know or agree with each other, but God had a plan for Paul. God wanted him to go to Rome and tell people about Jesus there. God made the Jews and the Romans work together to make it happen, even though they did not know it. There are at least three things we can learn from this passage. First, we see how God is sovereign over Paul's life and ministry. Even though Paul faces opposition, violence, and imprisonment, he is not outside of God's plan and purpose. God had told Paul that in Jerusalem and Rome, he would testify about Jesus. And through these events, Paul is fulfilling that calling. Through Paul's suffering, God is advancing the gospel to different people groups and places. God worked through both the Jews and the Romans to help Paul accomplish his mission of sharing the gospel of Jesus to people who were not Jews in Jerusalem and later in Rome. The Jews and the Romans did not know or like each other, and they did not know of God's plan, but they still helped to make it happen in ways they did not understand. Second, we see Paul's faithfulness to his calling. He had a strong desire to go to Jerusalem, even though he knew it would be dangerous. Paul wanted to show his love and solidarity with the Jewish Christians there. He also wanted to demonstrate his respect for the Jewish law and customs by taking part in a purification ritual at the temple. He maintained the integrity of the gospel message and of his identity as a follower of Jesus Christ. But he also did not despise or reject his Jewish heritage. Third, we see Paul being misunderstood and attacked by his enemies. The Jews who attacked him had a twisted view of him and his message. They were tricked into thinking that he was teaching against their people, their law, and their temple. They thought he was defiling their holy place by bringing in a Gentile. They did not recognize that Paul was actually fulfilling the law and honoring the temple by proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah, the fulfillment of the law, and the true temple. They did not understand that God's grace was for all people, Jew and Gentile alike, because they were blinded by their pride, prejudice, and tradition. Paul was not afraid or angry, but was calm and confident. He cared only about doing God's will. The Roman leader thought Paul was a bad man. He did not know why the Jews hated him so much. But when he heard Paul speak in Greek, he realized he was wrong. Paul was not a violent or rude man, but a well-educated and polite man. He saw something in Paul that made him trust him. How does this passage apply to us? First, trust God's sovereignty over our lives and ministries. Believe that God works through all things for our good and for his glory, even when we face trials and troubles. Follow God's guidance and direction, even when it seems risky, costly, or doesn't make sense to us. Second, follow God's calling. Know what God has called us to do. Know who God has called us to be. Love God and love our neighbor with our words and with our actions. Respect and appreciate our culture and background, but without idolizing it or rejecting it. Be adaptable in different situations and with different groups of people, while maintaining the integrity of the gospel message and our identity as God's children. Third, respond with courage and humility when we are misunderstood and mistreated. Expect opposition and hostility from the world that does not know God or the gospel of Jesus Christ. Speak the truth in love, with respect, and with gentleness. Pray for our enemies and bless them. When we suffer, rejoice that we have been counted worthy to suffer for the sake of Jesus Christ.